Genetic potential, the defining source of an athlete's talent and performance. What is it, and how do we go about understanding it and ultimately unleashing it? What is the reach, the scope, and the depth of our inherent athletic capacity, and how do we develop it? How far will hard work get us, and how smart does that work have to be? Where are the limits, and what are the limits made of? And what parts are played by strength of character, the power of the mind, and resilience of the spirit? Of these are the essential questions to be asked and answered on the Genetic Potential Show.
Hey, welcome back to Genetic Potential TV. I'm Kelly Starrett, and today we have a really great guest. Esther Gokhale is one of the preeminent thinkers around the space of posture, of basic human organization, especially in the realm of sort of our modern lives. She was based out of Silicon Valley. She's written a best-selling book about how to teach people sort of the language of getting organized, the language of posture, the language of movement. One of the things that we're proud of is that we can initiate these conversations that have to be scalable. They have to be able to scale from your mom, and the principles have to go scale up to my Olympic athlete, from Christy Phillips, my dream CrossFit crush, all the way up to my tactical athlete. And teaching people the base organization of how to get stable, of how to manage and live in the day-to-day. More importantly, as I talk about regularly, is sort of this idea of that Musashi put forward, that your combat stance is your everyday stance. And what we want people to kind of start doing is kind of blend or stop kind of dissociating who they are in the gym from who they are and how they pick up their kids and how they live, how they move, how they sit. We want to bring that consciousness and awareness and mindfulness. Esther is a master at this. She has been teaching this around the planet and really plucking people back from the brink of surgeries, of pain, of chronic pain states. The research on this is insane. We look at back pain as a $100 billion problem annually. It affects 8 out of 10 Americans will have back pain they'll have to seek treatment for. I mean, just think about that for a second. $100 billion problem. I mean, we could buy an iPad and a barbell for every kid on the planet with loaded software about how to move. Instead, you know what we've done is that we're getting to an epidemic of problems. We know that kids are having the same back problems that adults are having. We're seeing not trending in the right direction in spite of what's going on. Genetic Potential TV is about taking out the slack, about kind of having the conversations around the dinner table that we wish that we'd had. And today, understand that we want to give you the resources, but this episode is for all your friends who are not necessarily athletes and all your friends who are not necessarily training hard, but that understand that the way you teach and move and think about your spine during the deadlift is how you should be thinking when you hip hinge or how you get organized. So hang tough, Esther Gokhale, unbelievable woman and totally inspiring in the way of about kind of changing consciousness and reclaiming people's lives. Hang tough, we'll see you guys in a minute.
Okay guys, you want to get a hold of us, you want to get more involved, here's how you're going to do it. Hit us on Facebook.
Send us your best picture of the worst thing you're seeing during the week.
Twitter, at GP Television.
Hashtag LeopardFail. Hashtag I See More Potential. And then of course, hashtag GPTV. Welcome back to GPTV. I'm Kelly Starrett, and I am so pleased to have Miss Esther Gokhale with us. Thank you so much for being here. As we set up in the intro, this is sitting, posture, pain, mechanics, daily life. These are big, big problems. They're big problems financially. They're big problems socially. We kid all around the time that, the human being has a brain for a reason to move us through the environment. This is why the brain exists. And when you challenge the central nervous system, we see immediate shutdown in force production in athletics. We see a loss of carriage for the primary engines of your hip and shoulder, and central nervous system injury, wait for it, is a bummer. It's a real bummer. And because once your back hurts or neck hurts, it's got your attention. So Esther's work, seminal, trying to change the awareness and posture habits of day-to-day workers, life, moms and dads. What I've read your book a long time ago, is that this should be common knowledge, common experience, and it's not at all.
I certainly agree with that.
Can you talk?
It's getting to be more. known.
It's going to be known.
Yeah.
Only because it's sort of slapping us in the face, isn't it?
Increasingly so. I mean, the crazy incidence we have in back pain for adults is now, you find it among teenagers. Like their incidence of back pain is approaching adult incidence.
Oh, that's great. I think we were just talking about some of the epidemiology numbers, the statistics. 80% of people will have back pain
Some point in their lives.
some point in their life that will require treatment.
Yeah.
That it's what's the $1 billion number?
$100 billion a year. being
just a year.
spent on back pain in this country.
So I could buy an iPad, but instead I'm going to buy back pain treatment. I think it's 500,000 back surgeries, which is pretty insane. So one of our hypotheses is that you have to come out unharmed of your life at exercise at 1 rep or at 1,000,000 reps. You're designed to probably, honestly, be about 110 years old. We know that. And you should be pain-free. These are the resting states of the human being. The resting state should be pain-free. So by the time pain is popped into your consciousness, we have a problem.
And one of the unfortunate things is that we've lowered the bar in our society. We sort of expect to fall apart as we age. I mean, the average person does. You know, we take back pain as normal. We take degenerative disc disease as something normal with aging. And I have people come to me regularly and they've got arthritis in their spine and they've seen their doctors and the doctors have told them to, cough it up, it's normal for your age. And I invite people to raise their bar.
I love that.
Because if you don't expect more, then you're not even going to look for more.
Well, and we both have spent a lot of time in this chronic pain condition. People, even with my own experience with neck pain, your own experience in back pain, one of what we should talk about, because I think it really does change the consciousness about, for me, I had to get religion about these things, and we always kid around that we're either going to see people because they're losing, or we see people because they're
hurting.
They're hurting. And either way, I've got you. I mean, it's a perfect business model, let's be honest.
Yeah. And that's how you develop your passions. That's why we have pain. Pain is nature's mechanism for riveting your attention. But if you don't know how to interpret the pain, then you do things like try to squelch it, try to slap it down, and so on. And in fact, it's there to be an ally, to help guide you towards in a better direction.
Well, and I have a lot of ER med doc surgeon friends, right? And people come in and say, hey, I'm having back pain, I should have an MRI. And one of the jokes, of course, is they're like, no, we're not going to do an MRI because it'll say we have a spine of a 50-year-old former football player, powerlifter, mother of 4, right? That we're going to see these degenerative changes in the spine that maybe we can actually buffer, but aren't the genesis or the reason we're having pain.
Yeah.
Are they the pain generators? What is the actual pain generator in the spine?
Yeah, I mean, there's very little correlation between the clinical symptoms and the actual MRI readings. When MRIs first came out, everybody looked like a surgery candidate. And so it took a while to realize, hey, there's not that much correlation. So it's really a good question, what is causing all that pain if it isn't necessarily the stuff that's showing up on the x-rays and the MRIs.
Right. And to be clear, we both agree that we have friends who are absolutely surgical candidates, right? That we see.
When it's needed, thank goodness.
That's right.
There are people who have the expertise to do it.
That's right. I just did a piece on spondy for our website, and clearly you can't out-posture spondy if you're an athlete or moving. Once we've lost that primary instability and you're guillotining the spine, that's so many reps and oscillations down if it wasn't a single catastrophic incident that, we're going to probably have to have an intervention that pulls us back.
And very often I find that the architecture around the facet joint is what, encourages that sliding. And so between lengthening and really in a very customized way addressing the particular vertebral level where there is the spondy, I have seen a lot of, relief in people, but obviously, if it's a grade 5 spondy, rush off to the surgeon.
Well, that's right. And we feel the same way. At some point, we haven't, and what's interesting, of course, is I always laugh that, we're not the first people who have taken a crack at this. That for thousands of years, people have been informed about the positions of the spine. you brought a little statue here, and I can't speak to how old this is or where it is. Is this like a Russian?
It's from South India.
South India, of
Yeah, I was
course.
traveling in Kerala, and I have a little collection because this is one of the ways I use to inspire people. I try to really get people between the eyes, with intellectual constructs, with visual images, with things they can actually hold and that will inspire them, and certainly with hands-on, placement and so on. But this appeals to people's aesthetic sense and people's it's almost a spiritual journey, like, wow, people used to be like that, here it is. And what happened?
People,
an indignation.
That's right, and I know that you have this too. People comment on my posture all the time. And they're like, your posture is freaking me out. And I'm like, this is the only position that feels great all the time. I can deviate, I can roll, I can dance, I can move. Ido Portal is a great thinker, and he says, hey, look, you've got to be strong out of position as well, but you've got to be able to have this home base.
Baseline.
That's right.
Yeah. One thing that I regret is that not more of my students get feedback from their surrounding people, from their friends and family on posture. Because I think for the most part, people don't have posture on their radar. So they can see something's different, but they're not sure exactly what. They'll say, did you get a haircut? Have you lost weight? Something's
right.
different. You're looking good. Wow, you look 10 years younger. But they can't articulate that, hey, you're really standing differently. That's just not something that people are tuned to.
And yet, I know from, what's so interesting is that, one of my friends, Jill Miller, who is a fascia movement expert, hammers her coaches and teachers if they're standing in a disorganized way, because it communicates disorganization, it communicates distrust. And so, people are like, well, isn't this more an aggressive posture? Well, it certainly says that I'm more organized and stable in my thinking versus, this communication.
Like
so I think we are very much aware of it, yet we may not be meta-aware or conscious of the fact of what it says.
We may not be able to articulate it. There's actually a lot of research showing that there are physiological measures that correlate with certain posture, like upright upper body posture. There's an article published in Scientific American recently, turns out to correlate with testosterone levels. So you not only
why is that? Right?
So
you can see it,
You not only appear
That's
very
right.
well, yeah, and you appear more powerful, but you actually are more powerful.
But even the whole
every level.
neuron can access of compress. Now my diaphragm doesn't work as well, and now I've lost access to my parasympathetic nervous system. I've lost the ability to sort of downregulate because maybe I'm here or I'm here. My sympathetic chain ganglia in my thoracic spine, which are stiff now. My diaphragm doesn't work. My trunk is off, and now I see upregulating cortisol.
Compromised, respiration, and your whole adrenal system is kicked into gear.
That's right. I think one of the interesting pieces, especially now that we're measuring so much of this, we have so much data measured that we can get a shirt that measures something to my iPhone, and it tells me if I'm in a good position or a bad position, which I'm like, this is amazing. Could we just waste any more money in the world about understanding this? And yet, we can track heart rate variability. When you breathe in, your heart rate accelerates. When you breathe out, it decelerates. There should be normal variability, and yet sometimes when people get in this stressed out situation, I start to breathe in the neck, my diaphragm doesn't work, I can't, so I'm measuring things that maybe I actually could change with organization and better function of my trunk.
I'm really glad to hear you talk about breathing in the neck, because most people really diss chest breathing. And they don't make a distinction between neck breathing and chest breathing, because chest breathing, I think, is a very normal and desirable mechanism. That's something that actually fashions your chest. That healthy stress against the bones will fashion a larger rib cage. And so it's the neck breathing that's problematic. But most people have kind of written off chest breathing altogether. Like a lot of people have been taught to only abdominal breathe.
And this is, I'm glad you bring it, because what we find is that when the body's in a bad position, it doesn't function correctly. We have neural inhibition, we have shutdown. It's just simple mechanics. And what we're looking for, and all I have to do is scale our thinking up into athletics, from sitting to athletics. It's a continuum, right? I have to take the basic posture and then be able to expand it up. And if I'm disorganized, or if I sit in this position and my thoracic spine and carriage gets stiff, I actually don't even have the excursion, much less the actual joint now positioning, the physiology to actually change and access that breathing. So I'm forced into dysfunctional breathing patterns.
Yeah, sometimes I quip with my students that, you know, we've made it so hard to breathe, you know, because of all the disorganization, the tension in the intercostal muscles, the tension in the back, you know, all these places that should be able to move can't so easily. And so we breathe enough to not die. And that's about it. that isn't enough.
There was some interesting research that looked at tidal volume in athletes these athletes had enormous tidal volume, maybe 120% of normal. But when they came down to actual load, because of the function of the human, they're only expressing maybe 60 or 70% of that tidal function. And to your point that, you know, we're not being able to express sort of this position, and it's interesting because I think posture is such a dirty word. It unloads so much baggage about
It's
mother,
like,
and you know,
sit up straight, stand up straight, which translates to mean this, which is really counterproductive. So yeah, it carries a lot of baggage, but instead of avoiding it, I have chosen to jump right in and try to turn this around and make posture, because posture is something that the physicians understand the importance of, and for us they're our primary referral source, and so we have that common language, and I've chosen not to abandon the word posture. I've added primal to it, you know, because it's the posture we used to have when we were 2 years old. It's the posture our hunter-gatherer ancestors had, and we don't even have to go that far back. You can look at your great-great-grandparents and old photographs, anything about a century ago or longer.
Wasn't that just the corset in the Victorian era? Isn't that what? No,
that's a whole story of its own, but no, most of the people were not wearing corsets, and some of those corsets were more like health devices. The earliest corsets were more in the nature of the corsets that the guys at Home Depot wear if they're going to really push the edges, you know, of their strength.
My father is an osteopathic physician.
Oh.
And so it's interesting, of course, how this works. My mother's a psychologist, and so you can start to see the interplay between position and mechanics. You mentioned sort of this sort of historic archetype of better function, about better organization of the spine, and maybe it was innate, but one of my friends was always sending me pictures of old statues, old fighters from China from 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago, where the back is straight, knees are out, feet are straight. It's like people had worked this out because it's the same body for the last 10,000 years. I mean, I'm fatter, your femur is longer, but it has not changed much in 10,000 years.
Actually, I don't see it as that they worked it out as much as they didn't lose it. I think in our society, beginning with little babies, we train our babies poorly. Like all the car furniture, the car seats.
You mean just putting my kid in a slouch sump all the time? Isn't that bad?
It's not the best. So we start, we couldn't design a better way to destroy a kid really, than what we do, putting them in these strollers and umbrella strollers, saggy bottoms, internally rotated legs. We're starting them out like that.
Well, and what we did was we actually just went back to a wagon with a hard board. That was really
Smart.
what we found. Our kids hated it.
And that's what I recommend for, strollers. Now, when it comes to car seats, you don't want to improvise for security purpose. You have safety first. But I always advise parents to get their kids out of those car seats and not transport them to the restaurant and where elsewhere in those horrible shapes, because their neural pathways are getting set regarding what constitutes sitting. And we're teaching them that, and then they're transporting that into the classroom and into their work arena, and they're arranging themselves the same way. And I think that's why these kids have these incredibly high back pain incidences and so on. And this is very high up on my radar, to change that around. But it is a hard group to reach because they're overscheduled, so getting them to come in for workshops and so on is difficult. I tried through teachers, and that's been difficult because teachers are, not the most empowered group we have in our society, very unfortunately. I tried donating 2,500 copies of my book, 8 Steps to a Pain-Free Back, and hoping that the information would trickle down. This was in my area. But I didn't see that happening. So now I'm actually thinking it's the sports coaches that need to be trained because they have the kids, and they're doing all those warm-ups and so on. And those warm-ups could be wonderful and constructive.
And that's we completely agree that for our model as healthcare is that the strength and conditioning coach is really the scale model of the primary care provider, the entrance for the future, because they're having 3 to 5 contact hours a week. We teach movement skills, we can screen and diagnose movement problems, we can get help when we need to get help, and all of this also gets put into the context of why it matters, is that I have to be able to scale this base position from, can I be organized in my athletic things that matter to me, right, this meaning-based learning, and starting to extend that. We worked with a team in your area, the San Jose State swim team last year.
Oh.
And one of the girls, the first day we were there, one of the girls was off the deck because she had bad shoulder pain, and she was overextended, foot turned out, shoulder hanging forward, and just hanging on her soft tissues. And they said, hey, she's not swimming today because she has shoulder pain. And I was like, is it her left shoulder? And they was like, how could you tell? And when we started to have this conversation with the team about cultivating this awareness that, like Musashi said, that I always say, in the Book of the Five Rings, your combat stance is your everyday stance, that who you are is who you are. And these girls started hammering each other about sitting up more effectively and build the base posture, base organization, and lo and behold, they went faster.
I call it downtime training.
Ooh, I like that.
Training doesn't, I trademarked that name, I like it so much.
TM, Circle C. Well, I call it hiding the reps. And one of our friends was a DEA agent, and he would get out of the car and walk past the trunk every single day when he got out of the car, because even if it was the long way around to his home, because his guns were in the trunk. And so when it got really scary, he would just magically end up at the trunk, and he didn't know how he was at the trunk, but he would just practice that pattern. So I think this downtime training really makes sense.
So it's like when you're sitting. You could be just slouching and, putting pressure on your discs and dehydrating them and then, or you could be, I teach a technique called stretch sitting. And so there you're decompressing your discs, you're letting them rehydrate, you're preparing them for the next impact, whether it's in football or jumping or, whatever.
Stepping off a curb.
Yeah. And so, that all the time that you're eating popcorn behind a TV screen, well, not all of us do that, could be spent constructing the body, making it perform better, also more resilient, so
even nervous function. I think autoimmune function goes up with better posture. I think any metric of upregulating the human being upregulates the human being from start to finish.
And is part of training, really. It should be on the radar of every athlete. Like, athletics doesn't only happen in the gym and on the field. It's happening when you're walking to the field. And this is something I must bring up because I, over the years, have taught in a lot of CrossFit boxes, I think you guys call them.
That's right.
And, they're often very tightly scheduled. I do a free workshop, and there's a lot of interest in the CrossFit community. And they're finishing up their last course, and usually the people are very gung-ho and eager to help out, setting up the chairs and so on. It's marvelous. The spirit is really great. But I do get to observe, and what they're doing. And there's a very big difference between when they're actually lifting and when they're, for example, going to pick up their shoes. And I'm thinking, this is also a bend.
This is right. I couldn't agree more. When I teach a course, I have people come up and squat, or can I have you lay down? And they think they're doing something else. And I'm like, did you guys just see what happened? And why did you practice all of the squatting and then move that way? Why did you round your back and lift the weight?
Right.
And we hammer people here about that, that we want to cultivate the awareness of good movement patterning, because practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes permanent. This was sort of our, I trademark. No, I'm just kidding. Just the issue is, but
Too many trademarks.
I think to your point that, really I think it's been lost on the teacher, it's my fault that I haven't communicated why we're doing this deep practice, why we're doing this excellent work, so that it can facilitate picking up your daughter, facilitate running more efficiently, or all of these things. How many times have you seen someone who said, I just reached down for the pillow and
then I froze.
And I'm like, well, that must have been a heavy pillow,
Yeah. People have so little leeway between where they're operating and an injured state. And sometimes those seizings are the brain perceives danger, even and thank goodness before there's actual danger.
That's right.
But really, I would try to train people to be very much clear of that zone, so they're not in danger, they're far away from danger, and the brain is peaceful, sleeping peacefully, not tossing and turning and nervously tightening up muscles, wondering if you're going to maybe, do damage. And so, the idea is that no matter how stressed you are, no matter how fatigued you are, you want to have so much leeway, in your spinal elements, between vertebrae and so on, that you're not going into the red zone, on a regular basis.
That's right, and we say, as I'm a physical therapist, and I need to be able to overpress your joints. I can take you into full flexion and load you up, and you shouldn't be injured. I should be able to take you into full extension, close off the facet joint in the back, and put you in, and still have no problem, because I should be able to get into those tissues. That's how I know they're normal, and yet
it isn't the case.
That's right.
People don't have that kind of baseline. If you go to Africa and you watch dance movements where women are like swirling their heads around, just loose, extreme range of motion, and there's no damage, there's no problem. But try translating that into this culture, and people would be in big trouble.
I was just having a conversation with Greg Cook, and he was talking about his work with Pavel, the Russian kettlebell master, of course.
Yes.
And some of the assumptions that Pavel was making culturally, that we already knew how to deadlift, that we already knew how to brace, that we already had some concepts that we could already have taught or had been taught, so that it was ready for his teaching. And yet, clearly, we are poorly prepared. I mean, I think I talk with Jill Miller a lot about this, and she's like, we're trying to get people to understand some of the base physiology of how they work, and yet their proprioceptors are so shut down and they're so turned off, and they can't even feel, what do you mean my back's rounded? They don't even, aren't even aware of that. That's why we prioritize the movement practice. And then also say, on the other hand for us, is that, I have young soldiers who are wearing 100-pound packs and a bad weapon and a heavy helmet, and they can't help but be in that position after 8 hours. So when they take the pack off, what are they doing to reset that posture? What are they doing to address the tissue? Sometimes it's not an issue of will. I can try to get into this position, but if I'm stiff, then I better maybe have a strategy to get that, restore that.
I always like to begin people with very simple things that don't take much from them. So stretch sitting, which is what I'm doing right now, I have. And
so we should talk. We're sitting in this chair, not the high chair. These are your chairs.
Yes, I thought it would be fun for you to try it out.
Can you explain what because this is a mistake. I always say, look, if you can avoid the sitting, let's avoid the sitting. Let's have you have a bar stool like thing to lean on, to change your position, to have your hip open. Let's stand. But all of these are still skills that require that I understand how to brace and what good positioning is. I mean, you and I are the first to say that a treadmill under every desk in America is not the answer.
It's just not practical. And I think sitting has been overly maligned. It's become the new smoking, And I think, yes, if you're going to sit all day, there's a problem. But it depends to a great extent on how you sit. And I believe that certainly sitting poorly is very injurious to your musculoskeletal system and also your cardiovascular respiratory system. It just isn't possible for the lungs to function like that. And we haven't really tested how good or bad healthy sitting is. That experiment has not been done.
Well, it's so interesting because I would say, I think that you can sit, and you're forced to sit on the airplane, you're forced to sit in your car, you have to sit at dinner. I mean, good luck going to a good restaurant and asking to stand.
Or for the treadmill chair.
Or the treadmill chair, right? So at some point, I have to be able to have the resiliency to sit and not be injured.
And there's also research showing that you do some of your deepest thinking sitting. You know, my husband's a math professor at Stanford, and I just don't see him pumping out the same theorems, you know, hobbling around all day. You know, sometimes you want to sit and just delve deeply into thought.
And if we scale that down for a second and we looked at yogis, I think this is a nice example. That there was this physical practice about preparing the body
Meditation.
for sitting and meditating. And it's interesting that they figured out that, of course, that sitting in full flexion and external rotation made the hips stable so that you could be in a neutral position, of course. And
Nice.
that in this shape,
Yeah.
I stabilized the pelvis, externally rotating the shoulders, stabilized the shoulders, and then I was free to sit and meditate, which was important. But my beef, of course, of sitting is that it's, at the worst, I can't really squeeze my butt to maintain a neutral pelvis position. Now I'm sort of relying on some psoas, rectus femoris, iliacus, QL. At the worst, unless I have some back to balance that out.
Yeah.
Right?
See, so one thing I designed in my chair, and I also have a cushion that has this built in. It's
And this is on
lying
your
somewhere.
website.
Yep.
Which
it's
is
on my website.
Gokle Institute?
GokleMethod.com.
GokleMethod.com.
So it's GOKHALE method.com. And we don't have very much that we sell at all, but everybody needs a good chair, in my view. And so people have been asking me for eons about what chair I recommend, and I couldn't really give a very wholehearted recommendation.
I say bar stool, right?
Bar stool, yeah, you know, but you know, if you're gonna sit all day at work, and it's nice to have something to lean on, and it's nice to have some variety, although
Yes.
I don't buy the theory that the next position, the best position is the next position, you know, that you have to be moving constantly. That's kind of abandoning sitting as a healthy option altogether, and I don't go there. I think sitting in moderation is necessary in our culture, and
Ice cream in moderation, red wine in moderation. You hear this, all things in moderation. So, talk about this for a second, because,
Yeah.
and then I want to talk about and spin this up into the athletic population.
Nice.
Some of the problems we see with sitting
Nice.
that my athletes need to be aware of, because so I can be kind of baseline functional, certainly, and I know that, for example, the elliptical machine is very popular in the world for some reason, but it turns out that the hip never comes into extension on the elliptical machine. And so I'm always in a slightly flexed hip position.
so as getting tight.
Right, so now I can just go from my short-seated position to my short-seated position. And so once again, I think that you make the case is that, do I have a movement practice that lengthens my tissues and restores my baseline, like yoga or Pilates or CrossFit?
Or plain walking.
Plain walk, well, right.
Will do a lot
That will
if
do a
it's
lot.
done well.
That's right. It gets us there, but, you know, does the sitting, you know, with that and extreme or more athletics pursuits where I'm sitting and I've shut off my leg musculature, my lymphatics aren't draining as well. I mean, this is, for us in the athletic population, it's much more insidious than I walk a little bit, I do a little exercise. But you're right, it's still a skill. I still have to sit. So I didn't mean to interrupt, but keep going on.
So, you know, I built these traction nubs into the back. So the idea is that you could use the backrest whenever it's available as a traction device. You know, because one of the biggest problems for people in their spines is compression. You know, either because they've been doing mischief with their muscles and shortened the whole arena, or they don't have very strong abdominal deep back muscles. They've kind of melted into themselves over the year, or they've been slouching. You know, for one reason or another, the back is short.
I love the medical terminology on diagnostic imaging. It's called moth-eaten multifidi. multifidi, some of the erectors, some of these small intersegment are moth-eaten, infused with fat.
Okay, so, how do we reverse this? And by, asking people to engage their muscles and become stronger, overnight is sometimes challenging. And so to have
That's
a little
nice of you to say.
help
That's right.
from a backrest or from some external traction device is very nice. And people, use inversion tables and so on. And I have, it's the right idea, but, how long are you going to spend on an inversion table?
Difficult to type on the inversion table.
This, granted. So here you have the possibility of many hours of traction without taking time out of your life. Most people I work with have busy lives. And so you could be kind of hanging yourself off of the backrest if it had a place for you to hook to. So we've created a place for people to hook to. And it's not very important exactly where it hits you as long as it's above the compressed area, which is the lumbar spine.
And to your credit, you resisted. I know you didn't make a chair for a long time, and you show us how to do this in your book, like with a towel. That's right. You can do this in a towel and a folding chair.
And if you give me a towel, I'll show you. And so it takes a towel or something with friction. And if it's a fabric chair, you can put it side to side, or you can even make a thinner strip to go between the shoulder blades and have it longitudinal and use that to hang off of. And I used to teach people with that because I'm kind of against gadgets and so on. I like people to be self-reliant and self-contained in their bodies. But people did complain, hey, the slips, the slides, you should design something, come on, And it took me a couple of years to design the stretch sit cushion.
The idea is that I put this cushion on my chair, which allows me to sort of capture that high thoracic, lengthen those posterior chain, and decompress the disc.
Exactly.
The same, we teach this with anyone with lumbar pathology, just to create, right, the position of the three spines.
Totally. And that'll do it. But again, how long are you going to be like that? You can't type while you're doing that. And here, here are my computer workers who are stuck for 10 hours, 12, 14 hours a day at their jobs, and they could be, at the very least, lengthening their spines for many of those hours. And it feels immediately like relief, if a nerve root, if a sciatic nerve root has been jammed, you can, people sometimes will get immediate relief. Suddenly sitting has become comfortable and it's become therapeutic. That's pretty cool returns for 1 second of effort.
That's right. And giving us as many solutions to the problem about, hey, I'm going to have to, I can't be in this shortened position all the time, but all of the indigenous postures did sit. But we had to be strong, we had to have trunks that were awake, we made certain assumptions. Watch children play and they can squat and they sit, and we've lost that extensibility. Even just the long sit is the death of this culture. People can't even long sit anymore without ending up in
And when you say long sit, do you mean what I call stack sit?
No, I just mean like being able to sit out with your legs in front of you.
Like the village Africans do with they cross their ankles usually. Yeah, that's cool. That'll get you really nice long hamstrings. So for this, I like for people to change some. So I teach them stack sitting as well, which is...
Talk about that, what is that?
Yeah, so the idea is you don't always want to use a backrest, or you may not
Which is
have
what
a
Mackenzie
backrest.
did, right? He was just like, hey, you know what? I realize we can't be in these bad postures for sustained times. We get tissue creep, the viscoelastic properties of these tissues that they start to deform over time. So he's like, jam something back in here, and now I've just jammed myself into some kind of mechanically stable position, but I can turn my abs off, which isn't the right idea either.
See, he uses a lumbar roll. So he's encouraging this kind of lower lumbar, upper lumbar, what's considered a natural lumbar curve. And based on observation of people in these other cultures, where I see that the upper lumbar area is not particularly curved.
And it turns out that if I stand that posture up and put it under 400 or 500 pounds, it doesn't bear. That we know that the position to handle 1,000 pounds is straight up and down. The position
the upper lumbar area
absolutely
needs to be really nice. And for me, the bottom line, and if we could maybe bring the pictures over. is, what are these people doing in cultures where they don't have sciatic pain and they don't have stenosis and they don't have
And we should be clear,
back
you're not fetishizing or romanticizing indigenous cultures that they've created, right? But we see in populations that toilet on the ground, sleep on the ground, less hip disease, for example, less,
correct.
right?
I mean, I'm not saying their whole lives are wonderful and to be emulated, but they
but
certainly
this
got
arm
some things.
is in external rotation. This is a pretty stable shoulder position right here. I'm just saying.
And look at that behind. That's pretty behind and pretty toned. And, they haven't been to the gym once, So they're getting it from their everyday movements.
And even with the arm overhead, we don't see radical loss of position in the lumbar.
That groove is even. It has even depth. And so, these kind of people have it. And we used to have it when we were little. If we see, any 2-year-old, that one is good.
Is this one of your daughters?
Happens to be my third kid, the one who I wasn't supposed to have because of all the serious back problems I was having. Now, when my first pregnancy is when I got into trouble and had surgery.
And this is really an important concept because, women carry around in this overextended position and have to be. Obviously, the spine has the resiliency to maintain this. Hopefully, I'm not making it worse by my nascent or by my natural state. I'm already overextended. Now I'm putting a bigger load.
Yeah.
But then we never ever sort of work with our women to get their abs turned back on. If they've had a cesarean, now they have scar tissue and they're just tacked down, and then we don't ever, it's a disaster.
No, and what we'd like our pregnant women to have is the same shape that we all want to have and that we used to have. When we were 2, like you see again, I call it the J spine, where the behind is behind. And the upper lumbar area here is not very curved at all.
But this is where people get confused because when they've heard normal lumbar curve, this is what we're saying. This is normal lumbar curve. I mean, I think you have a slide here, or is it on the back of that?
Yeah, I have it here.
Let's turn that around.
Sure. Yeah, this is what passes for normal lumbar curve today. This is from a modern anatomy book.
And you can even see, you can see the posterior wedging in
Yep.
some of this position. You'll
Yep.
notice that the spaces are even through the vertebra, even with all of the curves. And this is this overextended lost position where we
Sticking
put
out your chest.
put your
The
chest
stand
out.
up straight, sit up straight thing that people are unfortunately
If you
being
stand with your
encouraged to
feet
do.
straight and squeeze your butt as hard as you can and brace your abs, this is what your spine looks like.
So this J spine is what you really want. This comes from an anatomy book published in 1911.
Well,
And-
it's ironic, of course, because this is the true anatomy of the modern Western person today, right?
And that's the point. I think, our illustrators pick up what's average in our culture. They look at x-rays and so on, and they draw what they see, and then that average gets mistaken for normal and even ideal, which is a big problem. When you have an 80% incidence of back pain, you don't really want to copy the average. You want to go back in time. You want to look at the kids.
But it's a great business. I mean, isn't this amazing? So I think this is a nice other example.
Yeah, so I teach that you don't have to go to like this is a Greek statue, and you see that same J spine. I'd like to show people images they can relate to,
So-
closer in the culture.
And our friend talks about that these statues aren't just art, but they're also designed to inform and to teach. And EAM, external auditory meatus, which is the center of mass for the head, is right over the center of mass for the shoulder, which is right over the center of mass for the hip, which is totally a normal alignment.
Yep.
And this is what abs look like.
You can't tell where his rib cage ends and his abdomen picks up. It's flush, and corresponding to that, you don't have a severe curve in the upper lumbar area.
And so a lot of people don't understand that, forward head on neck position results in this lower cervical flexion and upper cervical extension, which is a disaster.
Yeah.
And if we actually extrapolate this, that's the position you're walking around in 24/7, which is a disaster. And look how flat the neck is even.
Yeah. So, I find these kind of images really useful because people get it. And if they get it viscerally, you know, and I try to get them intellectually, visually, kinesthetically, aesthetically, even spiritually. It's like, you know, I want them to say, wow, yeah, it's to be that way. What happened? You know, I want them to feel almost indignation.
This chair, I've noticed also that it doesn't push me down. It allows me to be in this neutral
So I
position.
was looking at some of your other interviews and noticing that you were perching on the very front edge of the chair.
Actually sitting on my sit bones.
Sitting on your sit bones, and that's what you need to do with most chairs. You go to a restaurant, and there's only one way to sit comfortably, and that is perch on the tippy front, put your sit bones on the very edge, and kind of slightly fall over the front edge of it. And you know, that for hours and hours, that's not the most comfortable, especially if the edge is kind of harsh. And so what I did over here was I created the whole front edge to be curved. And I gave it a variable curve so that depending on where you sit, you have a slightly different angle.
Once again, you show this, you can do this with a towel on your chair.
You can, like, I like a towel's a little bit harsh. I like a blanket because it has a little bit of loft, you know? So it's soft, but it's substantial.
My blankets are hard.
You like hard.
I'm just kidding.
And you've got enough,
Hard style blanket
you've
fighter.
got enough glutes over there. You got some built-in cushioning. Not everybody has that.
That's true.
So
Came
you
with the
know,
kit. It's not my fault.
So
Oh, you
if
call me
got-
junkie in the truck? I don't understand. Wait, what's happened? What's happened to this interview?
So, you know, so something either built-in cushion, built-in wedge as well, you know, ideally. But most people don't start off with that. And so to give them, I created memory foam so it's nice and cushy. And then I gave them pads here, those the sticky, so that they're not going to be sliding off, you know, because it's a little bit like those Danish kneeling chairs, you know, they also antivert the pelvis nicely. But then people slide off, and their solution was to give them a knee stop. But
Right.
that's hard on the knees after some time.
Well, and sitting in this deep flex position is not, you know, sazen. It's not natural sazen. It's the knee isn't stable there. It creates a lot of laxity.
And you know, and then they jam the femur into the hip joint, and that can get irritating after a while. So I solved the problem this way. You know, a little bit of sticky nubs to keep you from sliding off. And so you can choose how much help with antiversion you need.
That's
you
right.
know? So if you're back further, you've got built-in antiversion, you've got a built-in wedge. You don't need to, and if you don't have that much, then you
Well,
go
and
a
this
little
is,
further
you know,
forward.
we look at the relationship of sacrum to pelvis. This is one of the things that people are always complaining about, this SI pain. You know, and being cranked forward creates a lot of shear at the SI joint. And restoring neutral position between rib cage and pelvis, right? And you'll notice I always say you should be able to see your abs right here. This notch is a nice indicator that I'm in a better position than flying or.
Don't want to be
That's
that way.
right.
Yeah.
So, but it's one of the mechanisms of being able to unload that, you know, and it's interesting, for example, the powerlifters started doing a lot of these things called reverse hypers, where they would swing the legs down a little bit just to restore that counter nutation, the sacrum working in the same plane as the pelvis, because they were spending so much time in this position, they had to get those joints unlocked. This is why the first thing we did on Mobility WOD was a 10-minute squat test, where we just got people to sit all the way butt to ankle and go ahead and reverse like they were around a campfire in an indigenous position, because we're spending so much time jammed in this position and not enough time doing all of the shapes.
I think, you know, people deal with very different populations. You're seeing very different people than my average person. So I see two classes of people who've been trying to do well
Sit up.
by their bodies, sit up straight, and people who haven't bothered. And either way, they've done damage. You know, it's different kinds of damage. But it's sounding to me like you've seen more people who've been trying. It makes sense.
Well,
I mean, they're willing to do
that's right.
all this effort.
And certainly, you know, when I was a young physio working at Kaiser, I saw a lot of people in a flex position, right, at the beginning of my career, and we saw a very, very stiff lumbar spine, and you know, and really, really detoned and poor tone and sort of proprioceptive awareness. Spin up into this athletic population, we see a low movement in the thoracic spine, high movement in the lumbar spine, and and living in this position. We actually had to, I used to think really we should sleep on a hard bed, and now I'm realizing for my athletic population we need to be on a much softer surface so that we can actually get out of that extension that we're seeing from the running, from some of these other
Their
things.
buttocks kind of sink too deeply into.
And drop into extension.
Yeah, for me it's always like a matter of where that extension is, like how much angle at L5S1 and how much up higher.
Well, and I agree. And what's nice about, I think this dialogue is that for a lot of people who are watching this, hopefully they'll give it to their moms and dads too, but the positions that we deadlift in, run in, push press in is the stable position, best physiologic position for your spine. Especially in that axial load. So when I'm loaded axially, I really have to pay attention. And as soon as I sit, I've got an axial load because I'm not being supported by the hip, right? So it's why the posture standing is I can buffer that a little bit better than sitting, which causes this decreased position tolerance. We have to be able to go into these flexed positions to roll. I have to be able to go into these globally extended positions to smash or to swim or smash a ball. We need the spinal fluency, and I think that people do miss that.
You don't want to be rigidly in place, just like when you ride a bicycle. It's not that you're always dead center. You are very relaxed around a baseline.
That's right.
That's something. So it's not just about strength and just about flexibility.
Not at all.
It's also about appropriate relaxation and fluency and
I was yesterday, I think we were just talking, I was at the field day for one of my daughters and watching these kids do the sack race. Juliet and I ran the sack race, and at least 50% of the kids couldn't hop down in a sack, had poor hip function, and just watching the disorganized spine, lost the language, turn around totally fit. Who cares about the fitness? Just being able to jump a bag down with their feet together, and then watching also just some kids struggling to get into the bag. So looking about keeping the spine straight and transferring energy, and then for the older kids, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, I had them do a somersault right in the middle of the race. And a full 75% of the kids couldn't do a somersault or a forward roll. Thus we've lost this language of this is what a human being should be able to do, and empowering people that they can take on their health, that these little nuances and details make a difference every day, and they have to train for these conditions. And that's why the MoveNats, the parkour, the CrossFit, gymnastics, that's why we teach basic gymnastics to our adults. We're not doing backflips off the balance beam, but the language of rolling on your back makes such a big difference.
Yeah, it's extremely sad what we're seeing. I mean, it's just so, we have kids come in with fractured vertebrae and herniated discs, and they're telling me, when I was younger, I remember. I'm saying, wait a minute, you're only 20 years old. Why are you telling me about when you were younger?
Kid, she just called me a kid. I'm 20. I'm not 20, shut it.
So, I find, we do our work in very small groups, limited to 8 people, because it takes a lot of detail and hands-on. We have a 6-lesson course, and, we expect people to have their lives transformed. So it's sort of everything. And I find, and people are very grateful to have that level of care and that level of detail and hands-on at the same time as they're hearing the theory and seeing images, and it goes in very deeply in that way.
And Jean-Claude West and Peter Goscu and your thinking and think we espouse on Mobility WOD, and people understand that lots of different ways of teaching. My teaching is typically done in this athletic language, but it's still got to be able to scale down and it's got to be able to scale up, and that we're solving the same sets of problems, That yogis were saying, here's the fluency of the spine, you should be able to flex. This girl I hung out with by accident in college was a rolfer. Not that it was an accident she was a rolfer, but it's the accident I hung out with her in college. But that one of the basic roughing positions is being able to just forward roll down a chair and just be able to create the roll segment by segment and then roll back up, and people have just lost that extensibility in their spines.
Yep.
Amazing. Well, what are you working on right now?
What I am working on right now is trying to get some research going, because that is the gold standard in our culture. I feel like it's a little bit of a double standard. And unfortunately,
Oh, can you prove that your spine should be like this? Can you disprove that this is a good spine position, please?
you know, when there's so little downside to an intervention, we're not talking about cutting people up and so on. You know, I think, you know, what is the downside? People are risking a small amount of money and a relatively small amount of time and energy. And so I think it's a pity that we have to wait, you know, for controlled studies and so on for certain gates to be open. It's very interesting because we have physicians come into our courses. It's rare when we have an 8-person course and there isn't a physician.
Yeah, we have the
because they're
same.
bending over their patients, they haven't been trained on how to do it, and they get into trouble. And they appreciate that this is no nonsense. It's not airy-fairy, it's very down to earth. So we see a lot of physicians, we see their friends, we see their families, but there's a hesitation in referring patients because there is no evidence in the modern sense, and because insurance doesn't cover. And so they don't want to, you know, get into this whole interchange in their little 10, 15-minute appointment of why are you referring and it's not covered, and, you know, that kind of thing. So that's an unfortunate closed
And I
barrier.
think that's true, is that I feel like we have been using our physicians poorly. People show up on fire, you know, they're literally burning, and they're like, hey, fix me. And the physician, you know, and Greg Glassman uses this analogy, is that, hey, when you're drowning, you need a lifeguard, but what you really need is swim lessons. And your insurance,
That's a good one.
your insurance covers the lifeguarding, it doesn't cover the swim lessons.
That's excellent analogy.
Which is, you know, I think, you know, Greg's language about that has been very clear. And then at some point, look, this is an intervention that takes time. I think so interesting
and not
that.
that long. I
but
mean,
not-
we ask for 6 lessons is all.
But I mean, what I mean is that some of the before and after photos that have seen on your site of
Yeah.
what, you know, people look like a couple years later, when we know that it takes 2 years to turn over your fascia, 7 years to integrate your whole skeleton over again, and people look different. They look different on radiograph. They look different on, you know, how people interact with them. What happened to you? I had a body transplant. You know, it takes time, and
Non-surgical
yet
surgery.
the body is so adaptable and makes such quick changes so fast. I mean, the nervous system picks it up like that.
Especially if you're using everyday activities. You know, if every step you take is a rep, and you know every bend is stretching your hamstrings and working your rhomboids, as we both teach, then you know those changes happen rather fast. You know, and so I take it upon as my job to inspire people to actually make it happen. And this
Yeah.
is why there's all these, you know, images and chit chat between classes. You know, I use technology. I use everything in the book to keep it on their radar and to make the change happen very efficiently.
I love it. That's 100% right. I mean, it's so simple. People don't realize that you have a chance to get it right and to reinvent yourself. I mean, call me, you know, the CrossFit Carl Rogers, but I mean, you can be a different person tomorrow by bringing consciousness and awareness and cultivating that. You know, the kind of the processes or phases of motor learning is that it's very conscious at the beginning.
Yeah.
People are like, well, this is hard work, and that's right. We say even in our skills, just because it's harder doesn't mean it's not better. You know, and that you have to work at it for a while, and pretty soon it becomes unconscious and becomes
maybe
integrated.
I baby people, you know, more than you do, because I start with teaching
I'm
them.
a baby.
I teach them how to stretch lie. You know, everybody's able and willing to do that. It takes 2 seconds once they've learned. And, you know, they wake up and they're a taller person and they haven't been tossing and turning all night. So they feel better, and that gives them renewed energy to learn the next thing.
Yeah.
So I start with very easy things and then build on that as they have encouragement and results. And so it's not as much a drill sergeant approach, you know.
Whoa.
Me
So
too.
the issue, because you know, I you know, understand very much, and definitely not drill sergeant. What's interesting is that I have to have the same conversations with my athletes and the populations I work with, but you know, how do we have their attention? Because hey, I'm going to war, I'm going to the Olympics. Some of this soft art, you know, is the same, and that's what I want people to understand, and why it's so important that you're on is that, you know, that we are talking at the same continuum. It's the same language, and if I have to discard piece of that, that's a real problem.
And you know, my people, when they do get better, they need some drill sergeant. You know, like lesson 3, it's drill. You know, and after we finish with them, you know, I want them to do something, go the next level, get stronger.
And certainly, you know, when people, you may run into, my clinical practice may look a little bit more like your first lesson sometimes too, is that I have to teach basic positioning and fear avoidance positions and how to start moving without being injured and starting to restore positions.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's not that we don't, you know,
Yeah,
it's
of
all done
course.
in a hard class. So
No, by the
people-
time they come here, they're not on fire.
That's right.
Right.
But at some point we still have to have this conversation. You know, with the children, you know, I use this analogy that, like, I feel like all the conduits are there. You know, you're wired for movement, correct? This is why I have a brain, but it's your job to pull the wires through the conduits, and that's why we have mirror neurons, and why we have to do so much learning, and why we hang out with our mothers and fathers for so long. And people say, well, you know, I've always walked like that. I'm like, well, your parents walk like that. That's a pretty good reason why you walked like that or stood like that. You know?
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting to see people mistake mimicking for genetic inheritance. You know, yeah, that happens a lot. Like, oh, my mom had bunions. This is in my family. Said, let's not start with that assumption. You know, because if you go back,
I mean, if you're born with a
enough
toe
in
like that,
time-
it's true. I get it. I mean, the genetic bunion. Oh, I've never seen it. That's right.
So yeah, if you go back enough in time, you know, people all are to survive. I mean, we're at the end of a long chain of genetic successes.
And I really feel like we're in like some loci of control has shifted back. The pendulum is coming back this way, and people are saying, "Hey, I need to."
Taking
That's right.
control, or realizing they can be empowered, realizing it is their responsibility. And that's not necessarily a negative thing. It's a delightful thing.
Yeah, it's great.
It's fun.
People are hungry and ready to go. If someone was working, you're in Silicon Valley.
Well, we're all over the globe.
You are the
actually.
globe, right.
We are.
You can
We're
find a
abroad,
practitioner-
And we can find anywhere, and we travel and teach as well.
It's fantastic. And I've actually seen both of your daughters teach what places where I've been teaching, which is really exciting and fun. It's my dream is to have my daughters teach deadlifting. Let's be honest. It is. I don't teach them a skill, and that skill is being a teacher.
You know, if you're a busy professional, it's one way you get time with your kids. You know, just pull them into your profession.
I love it.
And then there isn't that split. You know, work, family.
And maybe it's my personal idea that, like, I did not want to, my dream as a child was not to lecture adults about posture, right? This is not like, this is it. But it turns out I have to. I mean, this is it. I mean, if you're disorganized through the trunk, I cannot solve your downstream problems. And we clear the spine first as part of our thinking, and movement and organization and teaching what this looks like day to day matters so much.
Oh, we've got a good partnership here.
How do people find out about you?
The website, goklemethod.com.
Can you spell that for us?
GOKHALE.
We'll put the link up too.
Method, METHOD.com. And then the book 8 Steps to a Pain-Free Back is on Amazon. And lots of reviews.
Yeah, lots of reviews. It's sort of changed people's lives. And there was just a big New York Times article. Someone had discovered that people have been working on these problems for a long time, rediscovered. When was that book published?
The book was published in April 2008. The New York Times was on Mother's Day in May.
I love it. They're slowly coming around. They're getting it. Well, thank you so much for your time. And definitely check out Esther and her work. And I can't recommend it enough. I mean, you have no idea. You have the right to be empowered. You have the right to move better. And it starts with you. Thank you so much.